Thank you very much, David. So happy to be here with all of you. Great to see so many familiar faces, so many of our clients, so many of the people that we work with in the industry. Really appreciate it. It's an honor for me to be asked to keynote here today, and I hope I add value to your thinking. I'm also really happy that you're having this meeting in Spain. We've been here in Spain for 20 years. We have nearly 100 people here. The principals, I think you met Tony Noel earlier. Tony Noel and Teresa Garcia are right back there. I'm going to be spending the next couple of days with them and their people. They have done an amazing job through 5 of the toughest years in the history of business, right? The Southern European capitals, as so many of you know, have gone through really a depression. And so to be doing so well, I can't tell you how much I admire them and all the folks there. But I also think it's great that AMEC has now twice in 5 years had their convention here in Spain. I think it's a good omen for AMEC to do their gig here, and obviously great for the economy. So I'm really fired up to share with you some thinking that we've been doing about this whole category of research and measurement, because I think we're at an extraordinary moment in time. And I'm not going to bury the lead. I won't save it till later on in the story. The lead for me is, I do hope that we can urgently work together, harness the convening power represented in this room, represented by AMEC and all of its members, represented by the big brands associated with this organization, the big associations, most of whom are represented here today from all over the world, and the big PR firms. Harness that convening power to push through the global standards we have always wanted by the end of this year. And the reason is, there's a bigger battle and a bigger opportunity down the road. Just at the moment when we've spent 30 years getting to this point and thinking this was our end game, it's actually the beginning of a bright new future for everyone who cares about quantifying results in business, and certainly in the marketing communications business. So I'll elaborate that kind of in 2 parts. I'm very optimistic about this. So many clients are telling us they need everything they do to count. So we want to be in a discipline that matters, not one that is just kind of skimming over here around the surface. Our newest client is Avocados from Mexico. The CEO came out of the potato board for 10 years, these big produce commodity boards. And Tim OConnor said in our first meeting last week, you know, it's amazing how many great and interesting and creative things you can do in marketing communications that ultimately don't matter. Really cool campaigns, they look great, you win some awards maybe for them, people are excited about them, they drive some media results, and they actually don't matter to the business. And we're going to do things, he said, that matter. Unified campaigns, beta tested, and then evaluated throughout, build on the ones that worked, eliminate the ones that didn't, and he says, show my new combined board what marketing that matters looks like. He's a Harvard-educated, quantitative-oriented person, our kind of client. And so that is just very encouraging. You're going to be hearing in a little while from 3 journalists who have joined us. Selena from OConnor makes a similar point. I'm often surprised that so much blood, sweat, and tears, not to mention sleepless nights, go into implementing PR campaigns, but there's little thought about the end results and what it all means. You got 50 pieces of coverage, nice output, but what was the outcome? So there is just this growing understanding that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and it actually doesn't even matter. And I will say, sometimes when you bring in a keynote speaker, you're bringing in kind of the ultimate expert in your category, and you look forward to listening to that expert. I want to be self-effacing about this. Many of you in this room are the experts who care very deeply about this category. I'm probably here more as a champion, as a buyer. We probably buy $50 million worth of research services at Ketchum in the course of a year. As an influencer, I hope. I work with dozens and dozens of clients, helping to move them on the curve to loving measurement and research and analytics. So I'm just a big champion of, I think this is the greatest army ever assembled to get this done. And I hope we can work together to really make a difference, because there's a lot of encouragement out there. And you know what? The context could not be more compelling than right now. I love this stage in our business. I'm coming upon my first anniversary as CEO of Ketchum. And only a year ago, I was kind of thinking, well, Ray Kocher, who's now our chairman, did a great job of putting us on a path to increasing creativity, Yes, focusing on analytics, making sure we were more globally integrated, some key themes, and obviously seizing the digital social opportunity. And I kind of thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to just continue to plug away at those things. But really, over just the last year, a couple big things have happened. One is that the world is increasingly rushing to the understanding that earned communications is the most powerful form of media out there. We like to say the most valuable media in the world is the only kind you can't buy. And so you see analysts saying when A.G. Lafley took over once again as CEO of the largest marketer in the world, Procter & Gamble last week, analysts are saying one of the first things he has to do is shift more of their spend from advertising into PR and kind of the unpaid side of media. There's just tremendous interest. Ad agencies, of course, are retooling themselves to do more of the earned play. And we, of course, on the hopefully in-house side and the agency side, are wrapping around a core of earned more paid, shared, and owned. Certainly at Ketchum, dramatically ramping that up. So it's not enough to develop better creativity, some insights, digital, social, global integration, those silos. We have to integrate it all and push big into those new areas. We are not at Ketchum trying to become an ad agency. So when we say paid, we're talking about all the new forms of paid. There's content amplification. There's paid integration platforms related to sports and entertainment. Many forms of search engine optimization involve paid elements. And so we're going to expand that definition of our business, and we think it opens up a world of opportunity for us. So more of a positive context. But it does mean that measurement needs to evolve. And I think some of the great things that you've been doing are exactly the direction that we have to go in. Simplify, don't make things overly complex. Make sure that it is clear what we're trying to get at, what's good and what's not so good. But I'd also say, we do need to explore more forms of research and measurement on the front end of programs so that we have more predictive ability of whether a campaign is going to be successful or not. We need to make sure that the back-end kind of analytics and measurement are even more real-time, are very attuned to what's going on in the social and online world. So we have an obligation, just at the moment that we're, as they say, changing the tire at 60 miles an hour, just at the moment that we're getting to global standards, to continually make sure that they are very progressive. So I completely think that the Barcelona Principles, the 7 principles, were a great start in that direction 3 years ago. They make it very clear. There's some good judgment calls in there, at least at a headline and top-level basis. But we also know that clients remain frustrated. What does that mean I do? Okay, I get the headline, but what do I actually do? What makes this something I should be spending against? What is the right call? Do we do a multiplier of impressions or not? Do we do a qualitative and quantitative evaluation of traditional media or not? What does engagement online really mean? One of the world's largest marketers measures itself by the number of one-to-one relationships it has. But if you dig deeper, the question is, what's a one-to-one relationship? I certainly hope it isn't someone clicking like. I mean, if a relationship has been dumbed down to that, then we're in trouble. And so actually clients are asking that question. I think that frustration can be turned into a great benefit for us because the standards that have been developed, that I've been very intimately involved in at the IPR and at many of the organizations, answer these frustrations, make it abundantly clear, and simplify. So as Ruth, who's going to be joining us also a little bit later, as a comms person, the big issues include how do you measure PR performance and effectiveness, how do you get board level buy-in, and how do we deal with the velocity and volume of information through digital media. It's a good, quick way of summarizing the playing field as we move into the future. So as we move from principles to standards, I do think the standards have to help us with complexity. So here's one from Ben Smith from PR Moment. PR analytics is no more complex than advertising analytics if done well. Very simply, set your objectives, make sure you've got some waypoints built in the process, and see whether you hit them. Those waypoints are those decisions, that real clarity around what's a standard. What are we really aiming for here? And I do think the standards that I've seen make those calls. And here is another, I think, kind of hopeful indication. We're working with client after client after client now as they come to us and say, it's unclear to me what I'm supposed to be using as measurement. Can you help me? And this is kind of an Amex-centric story. Those of you who were here last year, David Kellis was here from Clorox. And David tells a self-effacing story of how, you may have seen this, I saw this at the PRSA convention, of how he will put up examples of goals that are not weak, that are not quantifiable at all, that we would say that's a don't. And one that he put up on the screen was shape the bleach dialogue online. David, did you realize that the client was sitting right there?
Just as I move the slide forward.
Yeah, as soon as you hit the slide, you realize our client was sitting in the third row, and he had put them up as a don't. Shape the bleach dialogue online. But then after that, it led to a constructive conversation about, okay, so what should I be doing? If that's a weak objective, what would be a strong objective? And I'll tell you this, you see down there in the lower left there, this just won the Diamond Saber at the North American Saber Awards a couple of weeks ago. It's a campaign aimed at young parents, really young parents, millennial sharing things online constantly. I think a brilliant campaign to get them to more frequently think of Clorox as the brand to go to for their babies. You know, there are J&J, there's lots of brands associated with cleaning up babies. They wanted people to increasingly think of Clorox, to share it with friends. And I think one of the things that's instructive for us is the way that they reported the results in that. We were very proud of it. After a year of this campaign, they reported increased purchase frequency. So they're winning if they get people to purchase 3 times a year, not 1 time a year, you know, or 3.5 times a year, that kind of thing. Increased by 22% new users to the category, which is huge for any brand. Winning share of voice by increasing share of conversation online by 50% in the course of the year related to their brand. And when they reported this out in their award entry, the end of it said, oh, and by the way, we generated 83 million media impressions. So to them, the media stuff was tertiary. The real kind of business results related to sales and purchase intent was right up there at the top. So, you know, just evidence that clients in 1 year can go from frustrated and unclear to a really solid, I think, exemplary form of applying the standard. So I've shared a very optimistic view of how our context is evolving. Now I have to do a bit of a pivot. As I said earlier, game is not over. Yes, our context is changing, but I think we should feel that it's not all just heading toward our direction. I love to say the world is rushing to our door as people discover the power of earned communications. And if we can back it up with good measurement, you know, it's the goose that laid the golden egg. However, whenever anything becomes really popular and effective, you know that lots of other people get involved. Lots of people with a lot of money and a lot of brains and a lot of creativity and a lot of quantitative skill. And that's what's happening. So, as I described, Ketchum, you know, really exploring all these areas now and adding significantly to the mix and becoming more of an integrated firm. You think about the work that you've been doing here at AMEC and the work at ECO and IPR and PRSA, and we, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have been hanging out over here. And, you know, initially in earned media, editorial media, traditional media. Obviously, you've expanded it to standards around social media measurement, and that's absolutely the right thing. But guess what? We're now in this larger world, and this larger world is not for others. This larger world needs to be owned by us, not in totality. We don't have to become Nielsen. We don't have to become the measurer of all paid advertising, for example. But one of the things we're seeing, and as I'm sure you're seeing it too, is am I developing my own dashboard, or am I plugging what I'm doing into the dashboard being created by marketing? Because there's a lot of dashboards going on. Marketing mix modeling, a lot of platforms being created to measure all of this. The amount of VC money, venture capital money going into this business is incredible. There are companies that we met with 6 months ago that we wanted to buy and that we now couldn't touch because their market cap is through the roof and they'll be doing an IPO, all in 6 months. And here's my friends at IBM. I don't know if you heard this. This to me is, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, Ketchum, with David, we were actively considering developing marketing analytics as a revenue center for us. Not many people were doing it. Let's develop it in-house, including the whole advertising side. You know, we'll bring you the full platform. Let's not let others own that. Then we backed off and said, well, let's just make sure we can represent our discipline well within these larger platforms. This was, to me, the big telling thing. 4 years ago, IBM started really going heavy into big data, right? Into business analytics. They've been a client of ours for 16 years. They have spent $20 billion in 4 years on business analytics, and $4 billion is in marketing analytics alone. Think about that. IBM has identified that marketing analytics, not just kind of like some sidelight over here, is so fundamental to the performance of a company that they've spent $4 billion just on marketing analytics. And I would say, well, the odds are pretty good Ketchum isn't going to compete with IBM on this one. So we won't be building out our own platform. I would even say Omnicom probably shouldn't be building out its own platform, right? Or WPP. The big guns are all in on marketing analytics. So then the question for us becomes, what's our play in that? See, the interplay to me is, at this moment in time, we better get our act together in having a highly defined global standard around the measurement of earned and social communications, or we won't even plug into this stuff well, let alone kind of quote unquote own it. We always seem to want to own things. Which brings me to this. Are there any military historians in the room? European military? Okay, great. I got one. Any lovers of poetry? Okay, I'm going to start. Okay, right here. This is the intelligent zone over here. All right, thank God. This is unpremeditated. Can I take you back to the Crimean War, 1854? You know where I'm going, right? You recognize these guys. Does that ring a bell at all? What? First journalists in war? Yeah, you're right. You're right. We think of, like, Americans think the Civil War was, you know, with Brady and everything, with the first photograph. It was the Crimean War, right? Now, there was a super famous battle there that was later captured in an awesome poem. Tennyson, right. And what was the poem? The Charge of the Light Brigade. Do you remember why it was called the Light Brigade?
They were foot soldiers. They were like light infantry.
Good for you. They were foot soldiers, light infantry. All the while I was growing up, I thought it meant they were carrying lanterns. I thought they were like the night attack. No, the Light Brigade was as juxtaposed to the Heavy Brigade. The Heavy Brigade has full armor up here and on their horses, and they bring cannon with them, and they have giant lances and all that. The Light Brigade was for reconnaissance, for speed, and for taking out troops as they were retreating. So this is the fight between the British and the French against the Russians in 1854 on the Crimean Peninsula of the Ukraine, what is now the Ukraine. And the reason to me why it is a bit of an analogy, I don't want to push it too far, I don't want anybody to get depressed. The analogy, you got to go into battle with the right equipment. Good. You know what happened there? The generals sent them in the wrong direction. The Heavy Brigade was supposed to go down the valley and attack the Russian troops. The Light Brigade was supposed to go over here and sweep up for troops that were retreating. 600 men went down what was later called the Valley of Death. They got to the end right there where the real giant battalions were, and the only thing they could do was come back. 400 are killed in the course of that, which leads to the famous part of the poem, oh, but someone blundered, but theirs is not to make reply, theirs is not to question why, theirs is but to do or die, right? And so I guess the analogy for us is, do we have the right ammunition? Are our leaders pointing us in the right direction? And is this the war, or is this just the first battle? Because that certainly wasn't the final battle of the Crimean War. And so I guess what I would say to that is, we are doing so phenomenally well with this battle that we've taken on here of getting to standards. But I think it is now a smaller part of a much larger, I'll call it opportunity, not battle. So what I would say in terms of a path to victory, we should push really hard to adopt clear standards. Let's put this behind us. Make it a hallmark of our industry that we have these standards in place and get widespread adoption on a global basis so that we can move on to fight the larger battle. And here's something to encourage you. Many of the organizations like McDonald's, GE, Southwest, General Motors have signed that they will adopt these standards for their whole organization. Incredible. Ketchum has. The Institute for Public Relations has. Some of the organizations here, Philips, Best Buy, FedEx, and IKEA, we're in conversations with them, and hopefully they too will sign on to these being the standards that they apply. I'd add to that, we can continue to use our convening power. Think about it, we'll get IBM, we'll get Procter & Gamble. Think about the point where we have the top 50 marketers in the world and the top 20 agencies in the world all saying this is our standard. So here are some friends of mine. I would be very happy to push Richard and Don and Dave and Andy to adopt these standards over the course of the next few months. You'll have the top 5 agencies. We can move from there to the next 10. Top 15, 20 agencies, all the biggest marketers in the world accepting these standards as the standard of measurement and evaluation in our industry. I think it's very, very doable. And so what I'd ask, I guess, is if you're not involved now in helping to evangelize these standards, if you haven't spent time reading them, please do. Get involved in that way. If you are leading this army and are an important part of helping to make this happen, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. One of the things we know is that this is going to require us to develop our talent within our companies. I have 2 kids. My daughter is a psychology major. She's graduating in 9 months, and she's going into the business. She's going into either marketing, communications, advertising, public relations business. My son is an engineer. He graduated 2 years ago, civil and environmental engineering, and he's building buildings in Washington, D.C. I like to say that we need both of them to go into our business. We need more people who come from the quantitative side. I really believe that of the 2,800 people at Ketchum, every one of them is going to have an analytical dashboard on their desk that they're checking in real time throughout the day in the very near future. So I always say, flex that side of your brain. Don't be too proud of the fact that you got great verbal scores in your SATs and not so great math scores. Let's get more of your quantitative skills going because it's an important part of your life going forward as a professional in our industry. So develop both sides of the brain. Here, Arun, who's right here, made this point. Perhaps the biggest obstacle is the general discomfort that such a shift entails, from the softer skills of access and facilitation to the harder abilities of monitoring, analysis, insight, and evaluation. It's true. I say to our Chief Learning Officer, Robert, we have a learning crisis. We need to ramp up rapidly our folks' appreciation of the need to be more quantitative, an understanding of this, and a love of it. We're in the process of identifying role models, kind of quant geeks within our firm that we will highlight in online stories for their love of the analytical, the ability to show an influencer map in a beautiful way, to tell stories visually, the ability to show real cause and effect in a campaign, an A/B test of a campaign. People who love that need to be highlighted now and held up as role models. And I would say, this is Mr. Singh, he's a centenarian marathoner. I would say that those of you who are involved, I just ask you to stay committed because I think it is not only a noble cause, it's essential for the success of our category. You'll be doing it for all of us, not just for your organization. This is one of those classic things where no matter how hard Ketchum fights for this, it really doesn't matter. It's not a unilateral play. It is an industry-wide, a category-wide play. So in short, I hope we can work with some urgency to harness the convening power that AMEC has to push through global standards for measurement and evaluation in just the next 6 months, and then take a step back and look at this larger, giant opportunity that we have to plug in all the rest of those disciplines around this core of EARN that we have. So really appreciate your time. We have a little bit of time for questions. Thank you so much for listening.
So much of what we do in communications is an enabler, and there's so many other factors that are driving repurchase or new users. How, in the Clorox example, were you able to say this is the piece that communications owned and drove in support of that?
Yeah. David, I've read the entry, and a lot of the answer is it was a pretty isolated, earned campaign.
Yeah, the campaign was primarily earned, so that was one aspect, but they did
statistical sort of ROI, as in market mix modeling, to pretty much tease out the causal effect between the social media, social earned media and engagement with actual sales and new customer acquisition. I think the other part of the Clorox case study that's really neat and that AMEC had a lot to do with is when we sort of mocked out David Kellis by accident last year at this very event. Fortunately, he didn't turn around and then immediately fire Ketchum, which was what I was afraid was going to happen, but instead he rewrote his goals and set very clear objectives that he then went ahead and measured, which then in turn led to winning one of your awards. Yeah, Eileen.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. This was wonderful. You know, you talked about using both sides of your brain and really helping public relations professionals get comfortable with that side. How do you recommend doing that in your organization? So I have a pretty large communication team, and they're all one-sided on the brain. So how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this role modeling. First off, we're hiring a lot more people with quantitative skills. We're looking for it. And what you're going to do, just like digital and social embarrassed the older generation, you know, all these digital natives came in and we all started tweeting. I better get on that. We need to do the same thing here. And that's not age specific, right? Quantitative skills, more people that come from the market intelligence side of a client organization, the market research side, and tons of people now. You know, 5 years ago, anyone who said I'm an expert in digital social was kind of kidding themselves and us. Now you actually can be a 5, 6, 7-year expert in digital social, and they're coming from the analytics side of those companies. So we're hiring and using that as a wedge to get the rest of the organization. But, you know, inevitably there are also going to be swap outs. There are going to be, you know, people who aren't going to fit in well in a world that's more quantitative. And that'll be a painful kind of, you know, the euphemism one of my clients uses, skills rebalancing, where some people exit and some people come in. But hopefully a lot of it can be through retraining. Other questions? There's one here. Yeah, right here, right in a row. Yes.
Phil from Cantor. Rob, thanks very much. Great speech. I was interested in your point about, you know, the convergence between data sources, the growth of platforms and big data engines. Is there a risk to, you know, the higher end consultancy that the demands of big data engines will promote, you know, just data provision at our level over consultancy? I.e., we will cease to become a deliverable and just become part of the mix.
Yeah, there is. I was talking to Arun earlier about the Moneyball effect, you know, where we end up following the data and not using any of our judgment. My first comment to him was, we're so far from that, I'm not worried about it. You know, worrying about the overrun of data that kind of in a sterile and Machiavellian way steers the ship instead of our great creative intuition and judgment. We're really far away from that. I'll almost look forward to the point where my job is to make sure we strike a balance. But you will find, we find some clients who are now so enamored of the dashboard data that it does kind of override the larger kind of creative task that we have ahead of us. So, you know, as I say, I think we can all welcome a world in which the quantitative side becomes an issue. And we'll have to keep an eye on it. And of course, it depends on the organization. It depends on the power of the CMO, for example, and how in love with their data they are. But good thing to be out ahead of. I think here. Do we have a mic? Yeah.
Just to answer your question, Eileen, well, first of all, my name is Janelle Dixon, and I'm from MSL Group. And what I've done is taken the onus on myself to teach my team. So we have internal trainings, and I'm also training the broader organization, the account teams as well. Not necessarily with the hardcore statistics of stat testing and Z testing, because their eyes will glaze over, but I am training them so that they have some level of understanding of statistics and what to look for, what are the right questions to ask. And then also there's a really great institute called Burke Institute that offers training classes for researchers and non-researchers.
That's cool.
question from Andre?
Here we are.
Rob, my question to you is, you run a global agency. I think the majority of the people here are in the room are from the US or Europe. I think 35 countries represented in this room.
35 countries.
Do you see the same trends globally as the CEO of a global agency?
Yeah.
Or is it some markets are really ahead of the curve?
You know, I mean, it was certainly true in traditional media measurement that the age-old problem was you couldn't scale it globally. We discovered, you know, not discovered, but 5 years ago when we started work with you, and we wanted to put it in 22 countries right away, you had to do a patchwork of vendors. That's probably more true on the traditional media side still. But in social and digital, there's a leapfrog effect. I find in China, public relations still looks kind of anachronistic. Think about, you know, the dais with the red drape and the formal press conference is still pretty de rigueur in China for traditional media outreach. But the social digital stuff is some of the most progressive stuff I'm seeing, including the measurement of it. So as costs have come down, as the ubiquity of the internet has enabled this to happen, it's not like finding, you know, television stations to give you a video feed or scanning in, you know, articles and stuff. It's all virtual, it's all digital, it's all accessible through the internet. So the measurement side, the tracking of it, and the creativity of it. We're showing now in all of our internal meetings, some of the best work in the world is being done in China. Really cool, edgy, experiential, right in the middle of the, you know, Tiananmen Square kind of exciting work. And so that's a break with that age-old adoption curve that we've been watching for 30 years. Good question.
Any other questions?
We are miraculously right on our time.
We are. Rob, thank you so much.
Sure.
for the talk.
Thank you.